My key would not fit the new padlock on the marina gate. Through the chain links, I saw my daughter laughing with investors while surveyors measured docks I had managed for 34 years. I called Abigail twice before she finally walked over. "Mom, this is not a good time," she said. "Open the gate." She folded her arms. "I changed the lock for liability reasons. We can talk after the site visit." Behind her, a white banner announced Gull Point Harbor Resort coming soon. A photographer aimed his camera at my office, and the man beside Abigail carried a presentation folder naming her as current operator. My daughter stood inside the business I had built while I held a key that no longer worked. I did not shout or beg her to let me in. I watched because something about that folder told me the new padlock was only the beginning. Would you have confronted her right there or waited until you knew how far she had gone? My name is Valerie Hayes. I am 70 years old, and I live in Port Clinton, Ohio. For 34 years, I ran Gull Point Marina. And that Monday, my daughter acted as if I had already retired from my own life. Walter and I had started Gull Point Marina LLC with 6 slips, a metal office, and an old Ford that stalled in damp weather. Walter could hear trouble in an engine before anyone else did. I knew which permit expired in June, which customer was late, and whether payroll would clear on Friday. Walter died 4 years earlier. I hired good people for the repairs and dock work he once supervised, but I kept the marina moving one invoice, one storage contract, and one customer at a time. 6 months after his funeral, Abigail came to my kitchen table and said Gull Point needed younger customers and a stronger public image. She worked in hospitality marketing and knew how to make old businesses look fresh. She said she wanted to protect what her father and I had built. She said it beside an old picture of the 3 of us on our first dock, and maybe that was why I believed her. First, she asked for an office key and access to several vendor accounts. Then I found a utility envelope on my kitchen counter. The account still said Gull Point Marina, but the contact email had been changed to Hayes Hospitality Concepts, Abigail's company. I flattened the bill with my palm and asked why her business was receiving marina records. She laughed. "Mom, I am modernizing things. Gull Point has to enter the current century sometime." 2 weeks after I was locked outside the gate, Edwin Brooks called just after lunch. He had supervised the dock crew for 19 years. "Valerie," he said, "there are people covering the Gull Point sign." I drove down and found folding chairs facing the water. A Chamber of Commerce banner hung near the office, and a projector showed glass balconies and white cabanas where our winter racks stood. Abigail was at the front beside Russell Dane, a developer from Cleveland. She introduced me as Valerie Hayes, retired founder of Gull Point Marina. A few people clapped politely, which somehow made it worse. Edwin lowered his eyes and adjusted a coil of rope that did not need adjusting. Nora Ellis took one step toward me, but I shook my head. Abigail moved to the next slide. The office would come down, working slips would become private guest docks, and the repair area would turn into a lounge. "Who approved any of this?" I asked. "We are discussing possibilities, Mom," she said without looking at me. Then she told the room the marina had been lovingly maintained, but needed professional leadership for its next stage. I walked closer. She lowered her voice, though not enough. "You kept the books, Mom. That does not make you capable of leading what comes next." My fingers closed around the old key in my pocket. I wanted to tell the room about the winters I had kept the business alive while Walter recovered from surgery. Instead, I looked at Russell's folder. Near the bottom of the first page, beneath the resort rendering, I saw exclusive negotiation deposit secured. An escrow company was listed below it. "How much was the deposit?" I asked. Russell moved the folder closer to himself. Abigail stepped between us. "This is not the place for another emotional discussion," I asked again. "How much money did someone put down on my marina?" Russell cleared his throat. I was told your final authorization would be produced at the public hearing. Abigail touched his sleeve. My mother is attached to the old way of doing things, she told the room. We are trying to make the transition easier for her. Transition. People use soft words when the truth would make them look bad. Abigail kept speaking as though my silence meant consent. I left before she could make me part of her presentation. Rain had started by the time I reached the pickup. I sat outside the locked gate while drops tapped the roof and ran down the windshield. I opened my hand. The teeth of the brass key had left red marks across my palm. I did not feel brave. I felt foolish. With my key and passwords, she had started answering for me before anyone bothered to ask me. At home, I reheated meatloaf and set it on the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed under the yellow stove light, and Walter's chair stayed pushed in. I did not touch the food. A Harbor Fee envelope sat beneath the salt shaker. I opened it with a butter knife and flattened the notice beside my plate. Our waterfront lease number ended in 417. The project number on Abigail's presentation ended in 903. I wrote both on the back of the envelope and checked them twice. Have you ever noticed one small detail that made the whole story feel wrong? The next morning, my wet footprints crossed the harbor office tile. Lena Torres looked up from her computer. I need you to compare two contract numbers, I said. I placed the harbor notice on the counter. One number is mine. The other was used in a presentation to transfer Gull Point. Lena stopped with her hand on a file drawer. Transfer it to whom? My daughter. She closed the office door and pulled a heavy blue book from a lower shelf. A paper label read Harbor Operator Ledger. She found Gull Point and pushed the book toward me. The entry named Gull Point Marina LLC as leaseholder and Valerie Hayes as sole managing member and legal operator. I touched my name, then asked her to check the other number. Lena returned with our signed lease and a thin application file. She tapped section 12. No transfer without your written consent, she said. Not because someone printed a new title under her name, and not because she promised a signature later. Abigail had submitted a transfer request 8 weeks earlier through Hayes Hospitality Concepts. The application had been denied, and a copy had gone out by certified mail. Did she receive it? I asked. Lena turned to the acknowledgement page. Abigail's signature was there, dated 6 days after the rejection. I read the date 3 times before it settled in my head. She knew. Lena nodded and pointed to a reference for a conditional escrow deposit. $42,000 had been placed with Elise Shaw in connection with Abigail's company. I asked for certified copies and wrote Elise Shaw's name on the back of an old fuel receipt. Edwin met me behind a diner near the highway. She told us you approved it, he said. She said you would step away after the council vote. Why did you believe her? He watched a truck pull onto the highway. I was afraid the new company would replace us if I caused trouble. He handed me 6 months of dock inspection reports. My approval was on everyone. Nora came that evening with birth schedules, payroll emails, and customer messages. You were there every week, she said. Nobody working there believed you had retired. I picked up the phone twice after she left. Both times, I set it down before Abigail's number finished dialing. The following afternoon, I sat across from Elise Shaw in an escrow office above a pharmacy. She checked my certified harbor records against her file. Elise could not release the private file to me. She could suspend the transaction, notify Russell's company, and give the council a certified statement of what Abigail had claimed. She turned one page far enough for me to see the date and signature. Abigail had signed 3 weeks after receiving the transfer denial. Under her name were the words authorized owner and operator. The instruction also said I had fully retired from management. My daughter had made a choice. Has any money been released? I asked. No, Elise said. The $42,000 is protected in escrow, pending valid authorization and council approval. She agreed to attend the hearing. My hand shook while I signed the acknowledgement, and I pressed my wrist against the desk until it steadied. The city lease had 9 years left, and no operating rights could transfer without my written authorization and a council vote. Abigail had given Russell certainty. She had no right to give him. A county lien notice had been sitting in redirected mail for 10 days when Nora found it. The notice tied Hayes Hospitality Concepts to debt from Abigail's failed boutique hotel project. Her debt explained the hurry. It did not make the choice easier to forgive. The City Council waterfront lease hearing notice arrived on Friday. Abigail described it as the final approval step for Gull Point Harbor Resort. I spread the evidence across my dining table in the order I wanted it heard. I almost called Abigail again. Part of me still wanted to hear her admit it before strangers had to. I did not make the call. The council chamber was crowded. Folding chairs scraped the floor, a projector hummed, and the resort rendering glowed across one wall. Abigail stood beside Russell and spoke about an orderly family transition. She said I had agreed to retire and suggested grief had made recent conversations difficult for me to remember. For 1 second, I lost my place in the papers. Lena touched my elbow and pointed toward the front. Lena carried the original ledger and lease. Elise, Edwin, and Nora had the rest. When the council president opened public questions, I placed the blue ledger over the glossy resort plans. Would you read the name listed under legal operator? I asked. He adjusted his glasses. Gull Point Marina LLC, leaseholder, Valerie Hayes. Sole managing member and legal operator. Abigail gave a quick laugh. That is only an administrative delay. My mother agreed to the transition. Lena opened the transfer file and read section 12. Then she read the denial date and the delivery acknowledgement bearing Abigail's signature. Russell leaned toward the attorney behind him. They whispered for several seconds before he closed the resort binder. Abigail said the paperwork had been misunderstood and that everyone knew I no longer handled daily operations. Elise confirmed Abigail had claimed to be the authorized operator 3 weeks after receiving the denial. Edwin and Nora submitted records showing I was still running daily operations. Abigail looked at me as if I had brought strangers into a private family matter. I pressed my thumb against the ledger. I did more than keep the books, Abigail. You know that. She said she had been trying to protect Gull Point before I became unable to manage it. I looked at the workers and boat owners who had trusted me for years. You promised them my marina because you stopped seeing me as its operator. The ledger never did. The city solicitor reviewed the dates, and a motion was entered into the record. The council voted unanimously to deny the transfer. Russell withdrew the proposal, and Elise confirmed the deposit would be returned. Abigail shoved back her chair. You know this will cost me everything. I knew about the debt, but I did not bring it up in that room. I told her I could not fix her business by handing over mine. Russell's company ended her consulting agreement. By summer, Abigail's boat was listed for sale, and the brass nameplate had disappeared from her downtown office. At Gull Point, I changed the locks, restored the marina accounts, and required Nora's signature beside mine on major financial decisions. Edwin apologized near the fuel dock. I accepted it, but told him silence could help the wrong person as much as a lie. Nora became assistant operations manager, and together we started weekend classes with the local community college. Several months later, Abigail asked me to meet at a diner near the highway. She spent the first 10 minutes talking about the weather and the coffee, which was as burnt as ever. Then she looked at the ring her cup had left on the table. I kept telling myself I was saving the marina, she said. Saying I needed it sounded worse. I told her she was still my daughter. That did not mean I was giving her another key. We agreed to meet once a month. She would have no access to marina accounts, records, vendors, or management, and I would not pretend trust had returned because she had apologized. On the first clear morning of spring, I stood on the dock with coffee warming my hands. Nora guided 6 adult students through an arrival checklist while Edwin's crew opened the fuel station. The old Gull Point sign had been cleaned and rehung over the office. The sign was the same, but the morning list was in Nora's hands, and students were waiting by the door. That was change I could live with because this time, nobody had decided it for me. If this story stayed with you, stay with the channel for more stories about dignity, family, and starting over.